Excellent. We're recording, folks. Good morning and welcome to this CCAR training webinar series. My name is Art Woodard. I'm a recovery coach, academy co-facilitator. I'm also a person who's in long-term recovery. I'm also a person who has a sincere interest in our collaborating, in our learning to be able to provide the best care, the best service, the best support to people seeking recovery. And our agenda today really speaks to recovery management strategies and skills for working with challenging cases. And if we move to the first part of that, well, let me just go back because I like images. I like to offer images, and I found this image that says recovery. No one said it was easy, but they did say that it was worth it. And I think that's the thinking that I had as I went into thinking about challenging cases, tough cases, difficult cases. Sometimes it's so easy for people would have given up on me because I was one of those very challenging, tough, difficult cases, especially early in the efforts, and appreciated the demonstration of the toughness of my challenge and the toughness of the people making an effort to help me was folks in the 7.5 years that I drank problematically, I had 40 or 50 hospitalizations, so I just wasn't getting it. And I think a part of not getting was just the shame that was a part of that whole experience for me. I wasn't doing what was expected of me as a Yale graduate, and I clearly was disappointing the people that cared about me. So that issue of shame had me believing if I was really worth saving, if I was really worth change. And I think that's a part of what happens in this early process as we're helping people to stabilize their process and as we're helping people to move into deepening that process. Let's be attuned to the concept of whether or not I feel as if I'm worth it. And I think that our ability to care, both as the service and the attitude of care, is to constantly help people to appreciate the fact that everyone is worth recovery, even though it may be difficult. Hang in there and keep working at it. And I think the ability to help people keep working at it, I hope will come through some of the work that we're going to do over the next hour. In looking at working with challenging cases, we're going to identify tough and challenging cases that you encounter as recovery support guides and mentors. We're going to make an effort to describe the connection between addiction problem severity and recovery capital resource identification and development and working with challenging cases. We're going to describe awareness and assessment tools and strategies to identify the recovery capital resource needs that can inform recovery management planning and recovery capital resource development. For me, this is an hour of looking at tough cases and making an honest effort to understand how we might be of best value and support and care in another human being's process. Any questions as we're getting started, folks? Any any questions or thoughts about this agenda? If they do come up, feel free to ask. Looks good. I hope it feels good. Thank you, Val. Okay. As we were getting started, I asked people to think about what's on this next page. And I want us to think about it, and I want to spend some time for you giving us input relative to this question posits. In your role as a recovery support guide, mentor, and lifestyle consultant, what have you identified as tough, difficult, or challenging cases? And another part of that question is what makes a recovery support case challenging, tough, or difficult? What do you think, folks? As many as you can type, as quick as you can type them. This is collaborative learning. I want to get the full breadth of what we're talking about when we're talking about tough cases, when we're talking about difficult or challenging cases. Again, I have my own sense of what they are, but understanding your sense is very critical to what we're going to be doing today. Ooh, one that demands that I alter what I think I know. The person that I'm supporting is negative at every turn. People with multiple addictions. Young people who are trying to find out who they are in a very confusing, coddling world. Ones that demand that I alter what I think or I know. The person you are supporting is what, Brenda? The person you're supporting is tough, is challenging, is difficult. Ones that demand I alter what I think I know. Yeah, I go in it, Phil. I don't know what I don't know. So my active listening skills and my asking questions related to what my confusions are become critical to that process. Difficult and tough cases, co-occurring disorders, and multiple medication management. People being negative despite experiencing success. Ooh, yeah. I once had someone ask me, when does the joy begin? I've been doing this for 2 or 3 years. When does the joy override the pain? Someone with whom I've gotten to know well who is struggling with their lack of success at stopping drinking and feeling guilty about it. Yeah, that's one. Yeah. I mean, a person like that, I have to ask him, you're in recovery when you say you are, and yet what do you need to strengthen this process? What do you believe you need to strengthen this process that might help you to better manage the relationship you're having with alcohol? Is this a topic for harm reduction, and especially the guilt related to it? Nice group of responses, folks. Nice group. When you think about challenging, tough, or difficult cases, what tends to be your own mindset in the midst of that? I mean, I'm asking you to think about, does your stuff leak in? Example, I can remember the toughest cases I had were people who needed a referral to inpatient treatment as a result of their ongoing struggle to get to the place of managing their relationship with the substance. I had a hard time doing that because every time I went to treatment, it wasn't because I asked to. So my stuff would get in the way that I would almost give people a pass when that whole thought about a referral or a connection to treatment came up. And again, it took some opportunity for me to talk with my own mentors and guides at that point to help me to get beyond that. But clearly, as we think about, what makes these cases challenging, tough, or difficult, is any of my stuff in there? And if it is, how do I deal with that or manage that as well? Can you relate to that, folks? Sometimes my stuff can make this challenging, tough, or difficult. And that's not a judgment or a blame, it's just my reality. And it's that reality and the three legs of that stool that I have to constantly keep looking at. Because when things are tough and I can't get going in the tough situations, what do I need to be or do? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how do I manage my stuff? More importantly, how do I discover my stuff in the midst of all that? Because I so do want to help. But if I'm helpless in my own process, I may not be helping very well. I've got a couple of people typing. This is helpful. It's very powerful. It's collaborative learning. I think we teach best what we most need to learn. So as you learn about tackling tough cases, I was a tough case. I think we all had our elements of being tough cases. And some of the understanding of how to manage it, what worked for me, what worked for you, being the tough cases that we were. When does rolling with resistance turning to rolling over and letting our recovery off the hook? Wow, that's a great question, Blair. What do you think? What do people think? And when does, rolling with resistance comes from motivational interviewing. And rolling with resistance means that I'm not going to battle this individual over their resistance, but I'm also not wanting to let them off the hook. So, how do you respond to that? That's clearly tough. That's clearly a difficult situation. When does rolling with resistance turning to rolling over and letting our recovery off the hook? Again, I think that meets the question. What makes this challenging, tough, or difficult? I bring the science that I've learned in Recovery Coach Academy. Tell the truth firmly, but with kindness. Yeah, yeah. Jim, that really relates to Andreas Arian's fourfold way of living. That if you've been around me long enough, folks, you've heard it come forth, and because it really guides my own thinking. And when she speaks about it, in working with tackling tough situations, we become problem solvers. We become co-problem solvers with recoveries. And in becoming those co-problem solvers with recoveries, I tell the truth without blame or judgment. That's a critical part of how I manage some of this tough stuff. Tell the truth firmly with kindness. I tell the truth without blame or judgment. Bell poses that my challenge seems to be managing my urgency to assist, to learn, to understand. And rather, I'm challenged to listen, watch, letting my skills and ability to coach expand to meet the situation at hand. Learning is finding out what you already know. Doing is demonstrating that you know it. And teaching is reminding others that they know just as well as you do. I say that at this point because Phil, the response that you just offered falls in that category for me. You understand your stuff, managing the urgency. And you also answered the response to that stuff. And I'm there with you. I gotta listen more. My ability to temper my sense of urgency. And what is that urgency about? And that urgency in itself, doesn't that make the case a bit tougher? Because if I'm not listening and I'm not asking those good questions, how can I be a part of the solution if I don't know what I don't know, what's really coming forth as what I'm getting from my work with this person is feeling tough, it's feeling challenging, it's feeling difficult. It's not to say that can't always be, and it's not to say that that's not okay to have. But if it's limiting my capacity to be and do, i.e., care in that relationship, then I've got some work to do to develop some better skills there. Great stuff, folks. Great stuff. Tackling tough cases. This comes from this is a portion of an image that I discovered years ago, and it really speaks to working with mental health and substance abuse issues, as many people started talking about this being one of the challenges. And I forgot to put the whole diagram in, but at some point, you can request it and I'll send it out to you. But think about the anguish that fuels these tough cases. Actually, that H is begins the word hope. And the anguish is the disorder, the shame, the isolation, the addiction, the abuse and trauma, the incarceration, the discrimination, the disability, the poverty. How do I bring hope in the realm of people presenting this kind of anguish? And um, this is not familiar. This is stuff that happens. This is what we're dealing with. So when you think about tackling tough cases, how do you think about helping people and supporting people's efforts to overcome this stuff? And again, some of my biggest challenges in my early efforts to help was overcoming this stuff within myself. Clearly the shame, clearly the sense of being discriminated against, Clearly, the trauma of who I am in this world as a person of color was a part of the anguish that was not uncovered in early conversations, that was not uncovered um, in people relating with me because they didn't know what they didn't know, and I certainly didn't necessarily give them the best opportunity to know that. So I'm just offering, as you think about tackling tough cases, I'm offering this as an image of what some of those tough cases may entail behind the scenes, behind the words, behind the fear that the recovery may have in truly being open and honest about their anguish. Is this helpful? Can you relate to this image as well as these particular, I call them issues or problems to be dealt with as we move forward in helping people through? What are we supporting? We're supporting recovery from the cycle of addiction. And again, look at all that's a part of the cycle. Unmet needs, old behavior patterns that need to be changed, unsatisfying outcomes, confusion and frustration, pain, fear, and anxiety, building anger and frustration, feelings of powerlessness, explosions of anger and rage, physical release and relief. Someone is hurt by what happened, guilt, remorse, and it goes that word shame again. Folks, this is what we're looking to support people beyond. This is tough stuff. What do you think? What are you thinking as you look at this image? As you look at the capacity on our part to some level break this cycle through our support, through our guidance, through our direction, through our um, partnering with people who are going through what this image clearly demonstrates. Any thoughts or questions or comments about the image, about this slide? Does this make sense for you? And what sense do you make out of making a humble effort to help people through this? What a challenge. What a stressor. What pressure. Again, some of the pressure that we put on ourselves is wanting to do it probably too perfectly. Some of the pressure we put on ourselves is thinking that, we've got to do it. And yet it's about partnering with a person who's looking to get past this. It is familiar. It can be exhausting. Blair, that's why the self care has to always be in our heads, man. You know, I, I think about it, and I think I say it enough in Recovery Coach Academy, and I want you to think about it as well. We're not doing this work to destroy ourselves. We're doing this work to build ourselves and to build others. This work is also part of my transformation process. So the challenge offers me opportunity, and I'm hoping the same opportunities are being offered to the person that I'm working with. And yet, yeah, back to the self-care. Yes, the never-ending challenge. Because what you know what, and nice reminder. Because when I think about care and self-care, it's from the stress, and when I think about stress, when something for me is a stress or a stressor, I experience that I either believe or don't have enough internal or external resources to meet it. When I do perceive myself to have the internal and or external resources to meet the pressure or the stressor that I'm facing, then that stressor or pressure takes on the mode of being more of a challenge to me than a clear stressor or stress. And I love the idea and reminder that it's truly a partnership, Blair says, between us and our recovery, in a partnership that both parties must bring something and or work at achieving the goals. Yes, 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 yes. Well stated, Blair. That's the concept that I think when I originally was thinking about, this particular recovery management of tough cases, I had to remind myself it's not about me, it's about the person I'm working with, and it's about our collaborative effort to overcome, but more importantly, to identify what the work will be relative to this tough case. Because it feels tough to me isn't enough. I want to understand how what I'm experiencing as being tough, difficult, or problematic. I want the person I'm working with to understand that, because if they don't know what I know, it's hard to collaborate. So that's a constant reminder. The partnership. When I think about help, it's a humble effort to learn partnership. When I think about power, it's POWER. It's partnership overcoming weakness, empowering responsibility. I don't know what I don't know about another person's experience, but I do know how to listen actively and ask good questions to get to the place that I have a greater knowledge and awareness so that I can be more helpful than hurtful in the process. And again, when I'm experiencing something or a case or someone is being difficult, I've got to check out my stuff, but more important, I've got to check that out with the person I'm working with. So partnership is key. With that in mind, folks, and beginning to build towards understanding what this partnership may entail and what might be some of the work that we do, if you are familiar with this concept, what is addiction problem severity? What is addiction problem severity? Brenda says question mark. What is addiction problem severity? I think it's going to be a key concept in our efforts to meet the challenge of challenging cases. And it's work that comes from, initially, so I got a lot of it from William White as well as a couple of very other powerful speakers. Robert Granfield and William Cloud wrote a lot about overcoming addiction without treatment when they elaborate on the concept of recovery capital. So there's a hint, there's a connection between recovery capital and addiction problem severity. And you want to take a shot at describing what you perceive addiction problem severity to be? Isn't it severe, our own judgment? Can be. I think when you look at the addiction problem severity scales that are out there, it is someone judging what might be severe for another person. So, a good point that you make, Jim, in our partnership with the recovery, when we look at severity, it's them telling us what's severe. And at some level, maybe they're going to describe to us what they perceive for severe to be. So, great point. And yet, I think the concept of severity offers an opportunity for us to demonstrate to a recovery that we perceive this to be an important concept to think about and address, because it does have the possibility of really impacting the process of recovery. Felsford says it's a measurement of the impacts on the individual of their situation. Nice, simple concept. A measurement of the impacts on the individual of their situation. Let's keep that simple thought about addiction problem severity. And I want you to help me to think about, in your work with recoveries, how well and or do you help them to identify and or measure how their situation is impacting them, and what might be the realm or the possibilities of that severity. How do you talk with recoveries about the impact that their situation has on them day to day? Because that helps them to uncover this whole concept of whether it's working or the problems are so severe that can't overcome them myself. Any thought? The measure of the impacts on the individual of their situation, and felt that of their situation speaks to their process of stabilizing in stage one of recovery, as well as their process of deepening that process. As I'm moving through this humble effort to transform, to change, to recover, to work at recovering, to turn my life over to care, how am I experiencing? Yeah, Brenda, is other areas of life that are impacted by the process. Clearly. When you look at addiction problem severity and you look at the scales that measure it, it speaks to those areas of life that are impacted by the addiction. And at some level, the areas of life that are also could be impacted by the recovery from that addiction because they're still connected. Well stated, Brenda. What is addiction problem severity? How pervasive is one's self-negating behavior, attitude, and thoughts? Pervasive in self or pervasive in the collection of people we might be working with, Blair? How pervasive is one's self-negate? Yeah, well, very. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a part of that internal stuff. And that relationship that we build puts us in a position for people to trust us to help us to look at that internal stuff. My self-negating behavior, attitudes, and thoughts really went through my shame filter. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't worth changing. Change was not possible for me. Um, these people are just doing their job. They really don't care about me. I don't know if I can do this. It took me so long to get to this place of really making an effort to do something different. What makes me think I can? You know, it demonstrates the importance of affirmations. It demonstrates the importance of helping people to look at their thinking and to challenge their thinking and their attitude. Is it an attitude of a sense of entitlement or is it an attitude of gratitude? Are the behaviors that I continue to practice the behaviors that I'm familiar with that got me into trouble? It's just that I'm not using today. And are my thoughts that propel me forward, or are they thoughts that hold me back? Much like the chains in this image, holding me back, holding me down, tying my hands. How do you help recoveries awaken to the nature of their addiction problem severity? This is what I was talking about a little bit. The initial piece, and again, this comes from that hope diagram that I spoke about earlier. The initial part of that is an awakening, folks. And the major piece of that awakening is to trust in one other person. When you say answer the questions, Val, help me to hear more. How do I, while Bella's typing, reflect what they are questioning? Yeah, yeah. Active listening, summarizing, reflecting, sharing what I'm hearing, feedback what I'm hearing. Add to the depth of their awareness. So that falls in line with this awakening that I'm talking about. How do you add to the depth of their awareness? Big question, big skill, big resource in this work. How do you add to the depth of their awareness? When we talk about this awakening to the nature of their addiction problem severity, it's the key piece here. Forget the other lines for now. The key piece here is to trust in another person. The ability for a person to add to the depth of their awareness is for them to share their own perception, their own awareness with another human being and see what they get back. For me, that's what helped me to begin to dispel and overcome the shame. John Bradshaw in Shame and Addiction says the first step in overcoming shame is to get honest about it, to talk with another human being about it. I can't tell you any specific data, but no doubt in my mind, early in recovery, shame is a major block to a person's ability to truly embrace the process. And so our ability to be open to that and build some trust and develop relationships, reflecting is treating as a resource. Yes, it is, Jim. We, it's treating. They're the expert in their experience. That's how I treat them as a resource. I want to know what they know about their experience in addiction and as well as in recovery. It's about the recovery. It's not about me. Ask if you make changes in this area of life, what could change in the other areas? Wow. See, folks, that's the beauty of this learning, this collaborative learning. I like that question. Part of what you want to think about is asking these good questions and borrowing other people's good questions. And Brenda just gave us a great one. If you make changes in this area of your life, what could change in the other areas? Because we're so focused on the problems, and we're so focused on trying to focus on the solution to a problem, we don't see the other problems that it's creating, or we don't see the possibilities of change in other areas of our lives as we're making changes in specific areas. That's the holistic nature of the process of recovery. And that spills into the holistic nature of empowerment. It's not, and it speaks to also, Brenda, what we learned in Recovery Coach Academy versus the primary focus of in recovery. It's a primary and secondary, meaning it focuses not only the chemical health, but also holistic health. And again, reflecting on treating the person as a resource, asking those good questions is my ability to enter into a partnership, into a relationship that helps them to appreciate and have faith in the process. To trust in another human being is so critical to at least uncovering the issues. So if I don't trust you, my trust just sealed over my pain, my fear. My fear, if I let you know who I was, you wouldn't like me as much as I didn't like me, so why even go there? That in itself is a part of the severity of the issue. The severity of the issue being that I don't trust. The severity of the issue being that I've had lots of disappointment. Jim says, I once asked a guy who thought he was about to be fired, what do you need to do to get promoted? How did he take it on from there, Jim? Can you give me a sense of how that propelled him into a different way of thinking and possibly acting? Because that's a nice concept. That is so strength producing. And isn't that recovery coaching is different from the work I've done in the past? It's about an empowerment model. It changed his attitude and his actions. He went from reacting to be proactive. And what more could we want? What more could we want? And at some level, his ability to look beyond the fear of being fired, my gut says, helped him to think about what him got him to get that job in the first place and what he can do to get another job. Nice work. And yeah, Jim, that's how I define care. It's a service and an attitude. So the question that you asked helped him to look at how he could take care of himself versus his fear. And sometimes fear can be overcome by practicing care. Thank you, folks. The Addiction Severity Index, some of you may or may not be familiar with, measures problem severity in each of 7 areas: alcohol use, medical health, employment/self-support, illegal activity, drug use, psychiatric health, and family relations. At some point, the fancy dancy indexes that they have, you can use those, but I like to make this real simple. And at some point, I see myself developing a resource that I can put in front of a recovery that asks him to talk about each of these 7 areas of living as he's sitting there with me on that day without initially identifying as an addiction severity index. It'd be interesting to see how people will respond to these concepts. For example, can you describe your alcohol use? Can you describe your medical health at this point? How would you describe your employment situation? How would you describe, just asking them to jot some notes from their heads that begins to give us a better picture of what might be the problem severity. And initially, without even putting it as being problem severity, just having them talk about and think about it. That's one of the resources that I used in asking good questions, but I also could see a handout or a resource that a person has in front of them where they can sort of jot some notes to themselves that they can walk away with to continue to familiarize themselves with the areas that offer an opportunity to be addressed. Again, folks, it's about the recovery. It's not about me. I think assessments, indexes, offer an opportunity to offer questions to be asked that help people move along. How do we take this for a tool and have recovery to begin to fill it in their recovery opportunity index? Good thought. I mean, I like what I've never heard of a recovery opportunity. Yeah, two columns. Two columns. One column raises the 7 areas that have potential to be severely impacting the recovery process. And the second column beginning to be okay, with this being the issues that might be, the issues that might be challenging or ACT threats. OMG. I say that because I do a lot of work. If you've done strategic planning, there is, or to your point, Art, LHS is therapy. RHS is recovery. What's LHS? And what's RHS? Okay. Yeah. 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 Wow. Gosh, you got me thinking, Phil. You got me thinking. At the bottom of the severity index, I posited that little piece. Jim, what about those of us in the middle? What do you mean in the middle? Well, I look at left hand, right hand as a spectrum. Somewhere in the middle is where I am, and what's more important is what are the characteristics or what are the limitations and the opportunities or the threats and the opportunities in being in the middle that are being presented more than worrying about being on either side. Hmm. And look at that image that this slide has. It speaks about how do we know his assessment and level of care recommendation were correct? One of the tough cases that we have where someone who's gotten treatment in an incarceration situation or in a mandated situation, and there are recommendations that come forth from that. I think the ability to really work with people around their problem severity helps people to look beyond that level of care recommendation to make sure that it fits. And part of helping to make sure that it fits is also finding where people are at. And sometimes people are at the middle. But I like this 77 areas and lock into these because there's some very potent questions that can be asked off of these areas that offer a recovery insight and awareness into who they are in the moment that they're sitting with you. Let's introduce the concept of recovery capital. It's the volume of internal and external assets that can be brought to bear to initiate and sustain recovery from alcohol and other drug problems. Recovery capital is also described as recovery capacity in that it differs from individual to individual at multiple points in time. Recovery capital interacts with problem severity to shape the intensity and the duration, excuse the typo, of supports needed to achieve recovery. Recovery capital interacts with problem severity to shape the intensity and the duration of supports needed to achieve recovery. This interaction dictates the intensity or level of care that a recovery needs in terms of professional treatment, and the intensity and duration of post-treatment recovery support services, which is where we're at. Especially that third bullet, folks. What do you see that saying? What does that third bullet say to you? How make that simpler for me. Interpret that bullet for us. It speaks to the interaction between problem severity and recovery capital and the intensity and the duration of the support needed for individualized recovery care. What they have connects with, helps and or hinders what they need to develop to move forward. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we help the hindrance or the obstacles, whether they be internal or external. But what they have connects with, yeah. And the connect is the critical word. It's connecting with the recovery capital resources that are critical to the process. We've learned. I mean, recovery capital has just taken on such a powerful dimension in the work that I do since I've been doing Recovery Coach Academy. Bottom line, I didn't know what it was. Whenever we would come to that portion of the training, I would ask my co-facilitator what it was, and over time I learned it. But now that you teach best what you most need to learn. That's my experience with Recovery Capital, and now it's becoming my experience with Recovery Capital as it interfaces and interconnects with and acts with problem severity. And I think your verbalization is right on the money. We look at their current toolbox and see if they need to learn new ways to use what they have or if they need something new. That's hope. Brenda, that's hope. And looking at their current toolbox, and hopefully they have one, helps them to appreciate that sometimes we have to go through our tools and sharpen them or replace them. Nice concept. Nice concept. Do you think about matching problem severity with recovery capital as you work with recoveries, as they work on their recovery wellness planning, as they work on their goals? Do you help them to think about matching the problems in living that are part of their early recovery process with recovery capital resources? Because that's for me what it's really about. And how do you do that? I've got Jim typing. It'll come up. Blair is typing now. I'm going back to that concept, Brenda, you introduced. We talk a lot about toolboxes. Just think about the opportunity for have someone to document their toolkit and document their adding to that toolkit. Isn't that a documentation of their personal awareness, activity, commitment to learning, as well as gathering the tools to transform? I see it as a visual chart or a hands-on exercise. Yeah. Building recovery capital will lessen problem severity. It's what we can help with. Bingo. Bingo, bingo, bingo. How might recovery capital resources identification and development help address high addiction severity is the question. And what might be high addiction severity, because that really begins to speak to tough, difficult, challenging cases, those that come with high addiction severity. What might be examples of high addiction severity? I like your point, Jim. Building recovery capital will lessen problem severity. What are we looking to? What is the severity of these issues? Clearly, shame is one of those. That's an internal piece. Whew. That shame filter is so powerful. And when you talk about we can help lessen problem severity by helping build recovery capital, think about how do we do that? See, this, we can talk about this, folks, but practicing it, making it practical is the critical piece. How can I help a recovery build recovery capital that will lessen their problem severity? If the situation is severe, it will require work on multiple fronts. Having resources in many recovery capital domains can be a benefit. Clearly. Again, the holistic nature of the work. Again, it's the focus on primary and secondary health. It's a focus on the holistic nature of this process. It's helping the people to be where they are. High addiction severity equals a lot of possible areas in which to build recovery capital, clearly. Here's a recovery capital scale that comes from the work of Granfield and William Cloud. The figure below indicates how the combinations of addiction severity and recovery capital can differ. And what do you glean from this image? What do you see going on in this image that has connection to what we're talking about, and more importantly, speaks to addressing high addiction severity through building recovery capital? What do you see in this image, this diagram? The authors posit that it indicates how the combinations of addiction severity and recovery capital can differ. How do you see them interacting, and how do you see your role? How do you, how you need an elephant? Yeah, yeah, yeah. High recovery capital dictates high problem severity and complexity. Low problem severity or complexity, lesser recovery capital needed. Pay attention to its heart and meaning for each recovery, because for each recovery, this scale will look different. This scale will have its own appearance. I think about my own problem severity 30 years into the process. There are still layers of recovery going on from the stress of living, from the efforts to accomplish a meaningful life, and from the efforts to help others as identified as our challenges with self-care. Jim, you said this earlier. This is a really powerful. When you look at addiction severity, the top diagram, as the problems, the substance-related problems increase, the addiction severity increases. And yet we see, how do we move to a place of addiction remission? Because that scale shows that as the addiction is in remission, which speaks to recovery and ongoing turning our lives over to care, recovery capital is demonstrated as increasing. So I think you said it earlier, Jim. It's really about building the capital. And the key piece here is, how do we help the addiction remission based upon this diagram and based upon what we know about recovery capital? This is a diagram that I see in most of the centers here. I see in all the centers here in Connecticut, the community centers. How can we help you with your recovery today? There's the recovery capital scale or index positive there. Very simple, but this is one of those pieces that we can put in front of a recovery and have. I usually have them Circle the ones that are applicable to what they might need help with. And then once they've circled the ones that are applicable, to prioritize them. And I really encourage them to look closely at their own personal recovery capital as well as their family recovery capital, because that has such a solid opportunity for their growth and well-being. And again, if people don't know what they don't know about what recovery capital is, or even what the severity of their addiction process has been, this offers an opportunity to have conversations that matter related to that as people talk about. For example, when you think about your own personal recovery capital, what have been the problems that you've experienced in gaining employment? What have been the problems that you've experienced in your physical health? What have been the problems you may have experienced in any of these areas of your own personal recovery capital? And I think that opens a person up to beginning to talk about some of the problems as well as potentially some of the severity of those problems as it relates to this very beautiful and simple scale. And there are more helpful scales that get into more detail where people can really begin to break it down and assess it and become more aware and more informed and more open to the thoughts about how to address these. But again, it also helps to inform their wellness planning. It helps to inform their recovery capital planning, which for me is really um, taking as much a place in the forefront as what wellness planning was in the past. How can you help? How can we help you with your recovery today? And how can we help you with your recovery today, specific to the areas in your own living that seem to be the most demanding of support and help at this point? And those will unveil, I believe, the more severe problems in living that they're experiencing. I'd be open to some feedback around that. How are you thinking about, the connection between this diagram and the utilization of this diagram, the conversations that matter, the active listening, the asking good questions that relate to our opportunity to help recoverees to discover the severity of the problems of living that they have been their experience in their relationship with their addictive processes, and what needs to be brought to bear in order to begin to overcome those problems. That's what this is about for me. It's not so much about tough, difficult, or um, bad cases. This is more about helping people to look at what they are working with and helping them to move to what they want to work towards. Using today seems to be manageable and an immediate feeling of progress. Yeah, yeah, yeah. One day at a time. What can we do today? What would be a good goal today? What would be a good step to begin to move towards that goal today as you begin to impact what have been difficult situations? I think we just got to that hope piece of your visual. Yes, I believe so as well. That's what we bring. That's what we bring. We build a relationship that when the person is posited with the question, how can I help you with your recovery today? They respond. As we actively listen and ask good questions, they become more aware of what's possible. And that's hope. For me, hope is HOPE, having opportunities present every day. And the opportunities that are present every day are the opportunities that we have um, listed in the early stages of recovery, the stabilization stage as well as the deepening stage, stages 1 and 2. The opportunity is the opportunity to help people to uncover what they are challenged with. And that in itself, I believe, brings hope. This is a real busy diagram, but it's one of the last ones. And it's one that I want you to really embrace because, again, I think it offers some good questions. On the left-hand side, I made sure that I put in our stool because I want us to remember. And actively listening, asking good questions, and discovering and managing your stuff is our efforts that we make to help support your efforts to coach recovery. And critical to that is staying in your lane. And critical to staying in your lane at this point is that, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, there is so much going on in a person's life that we are not responsible for, nor do we have the role to meet all stuff. That's where the ability for people to identify their tough challenges, their tough situations, to begin to identify goals towards building beyond those tough challenges and situations. We are constant reminders asking good questions. And I liked this diagram because it's an individual recovery capital index that builds off of the couple we saw previously. For example, under personal recovery capital, a good question is, how does your physical and human capital help initiate or sustain your recovery? And helping them to hear about physical well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, and self-determination help them to think about that question more deeply. How does your physical and human capital help initiate or sustain your recovery? And the question is, how can I help you to gather that? Under family and social recovery capital, how are your intimate and family and social relationships supportive of your recovery efforts? I.e., family relationships plus social relationships and relationship supports the ability for that person to sit with us and respond honestly without blame or judgment related to those couple of questions is an opportunity for them to identify where there are strengths and where there are supports and where there is recovery capital happening in those situations for them and where there is not. And when they identify where there aren't those pieces of capital to support their effort, then we ask them to think about how challenging or problematic that might be, and that helps them to uncover their challenge. And finally, under cultural recovery capital, what are your cultural values, beliefs, and attitudes that help sustain your recovery? Again, it's about the recovery. It's not about me. And clearly, there are relevant recovery supports that are culturally relevant for all participants. That's a nice, quick and dirty, I think, summarization of a lot of what I wanted us to think about today. Again, it's really about thinking about a process, thinking about how you might address this process, and how you might walk away and utilize what you are learning in this particular webinar. Questions, thoughts, or comments? Did that happen for you, Val? Because it happened for me. This has been very powerful. I mean, I just enjoy people sharing what you're sharing. We all bring what we know to the table, and I think it's a kind of collaborative learning that we take and we teach our recoveries. Thank you all, folks. Folks, I put my email address there. If you'd like a copy of the full diagram of hope, just send me an email and I'll get it right out to you. Have a good day, folks, and thank you so much for participating and being involved. I didn't know what the numbers would be after, a long weekend and a holiday, so you guys are committed to learning beyond expectation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Enjoy your day.